Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to All Praise Picks. Today we're looking at the NFL. It's the final week of the NFL, and on Sunday Night Football, we have a really good game. The Minnesota Vikings are traveling to Detroit to play the Lions, and this is for the number one seed in the entire NFC. So a lot is on the line, especially when it comes to the playoffs. I believe the loser of this game may fall down to the seventh seed, depending on the results of the other games happening at the time of recording. But either way, it should be a good divisional game and a pretty high scoring game as well. Uh, so the Vikings are currently 14-2, which is second place in the NFC North, and the Lions are 14-2, which is first place in the NFC North, and they're first place just because of beating the Vikings previously this season. And now being back at home, I do think the Lions have a good chance of winning this game, but I do think it'll be competitive overall. In this video, I have a few parlays for you guys on BetMGM. As always, I'll break down lines, give you my thoughts, and hopefully if you tap in, we can all win. Before I get into the parlays, I'd like to mention that I do have a few bonus promos in the YouTube description for BetMGM as well as Bet365. If you can find your state highlighted on either of these maps, you can utilize those promos on BetMGM. I believe the promos for $100 in free bonus bets as well as $50 for Bet365 for a total of $150. So check out that description if you guys haven't signed up for either of these books yet and utilize those bonuses. Also, be sure to like and comment on my video and share and subscribe to my channel. I really just do this for the enjoyment of sports betting and sports investments overall, and think that with games like this tonight, it's just a good chance to enjoy football as well as make a little money. So this is the first parlay that I have at plus 125. I have Justin Jefferson for over 7 receptions and Amon St. Brown for over 7 receptions. And I really like the matchup here for both these receivers. They're number one receivers for their respective teams, and I think that both of them could have really good games. So looking at Justin Jefferson for over 7 receptions, he's had over 7 receptions in his last 5 games, and I believe in his last 3 games he's had over 10 targets in each of those games. And in those 3 games, he had 8 receptions versus the Green Bay Packers for 92 yards, 10 versus the Seahawks for 144 yards, and 7 versus Chicago for 73 yards. So I do think that if his target share is there, he has a good chance of going over 7 receptions again. Also, the Lions defense is very depleted, and they rank very poorly against the wide receiver position, and the same is true for the Vikings defense. But the Lions defense overall this season is in the top 3 in terms of number of yards allowed to the wide receiver position as well as receptions, and I think that's just because of the injuries that they faced, and them just playing a lot of man-to-man coverage just leaves Justin Jefferson the opportunity to uh, get in space and make a lot of catches. Now looking at Amon St. Brown for over 7 receptions, I think that similar to Justin Jefferson, he'll just get a lot of targets in this game and has played well versus the um, Vikings in the past. In their last game this season, on October 20th, he had 8 receptions for 122 yards, and I think that he could probably get a large target share in this game. He's also gone over 7 receptions in 2 out of his last 3 games, having 8 versus San Francisco for 60 yards, 6 versus Chicago for 70 yards, and then 14 versus Buffalo for a whopping 193 yards. So I do think that he has a good chance of um, getting over 7 receptions as well. At plus 125, I put one or half unit on this parlay for a potential return on investment of 125%. As always, have bankroll management and understanding of your finances when deciding to place these bets if you decide to place it with me. So the next parlay that I have is at plus 110. So I have Jahmyr Gibbs to score a touchdown as well as to have 100 rushing and receiving yards combined in the game, as well as Jared Goff to go under 3 passing touchdowns. And my rationale for this is that if the Lions defense actually plays better than they have been with just the high stakes of this game and with this being a divisional matchup, I think that they could really utilize Gibbs with his versatility and elusiveness as a running back, um, both as a rusher and as a receiver. And I think that he has a good chance of going over 100 rushing and receiving yards. Since David Montgomery has gotten injured, Gibbs has gone over 150 rushing and receiving yards in his last 2 games. He had 117 rushing yards versus San Francisco and 46 receiving yards on 4 catches. And then versus Chicago, he had 109 rushing yards and 45 receiving yards. And he scored a touchdown in both those games. So I do like his chances for scoring a touchdown here too. Now looking at Jared Goff, I really think that he has been a much better quarterback than he's been given credit for, and should be in the MVP race still with Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. But I do think that his line is a little bit too high for him to have 3 passing touchdowns. Yes, he's had 3 passing touchdowns in his last 4 games, and he has passed the ball a lot more in those games, having over 32 passing attempts in each of those games. But I really like his yards in this one rather than him to have 3 passing touchdowns, and I think that Jahmyr Gibbs is probably a better bet to score a touchdown and could potentially score 2 touchdowns in this game. So at plus 110, I invested half a unit on this parlay for a potential return on investment of 110%. As usual, have bankroll consciousness and understanding your finances when deciding to place these bets if you decide to place it with me. So this next parlay is a combination of Gibbs and St. Brown as well as Justin Jefferson stats. So at plus 115, I have Jefferson for over 50 receiving yards, St. Brown for over 50 receiving yards, and Gibbs to have over 25 receiving yards as well as to score a touchdown. As I mentioned at the top of this video, I think that Jefferson and St. Brown have a pretty good matchup when it comes to the defenses that they're playing. And instead of taking them for their receptions, I took them for their yards. I think that if they have over 7 receptions in the game, they probably both go over 50 receiving yards. And then for Jahmyr Gibbs, he's had over 40 receiving yards in his last 2 games, racking up 45 and 46. And he's actually gone over 25 receiving yards in his last 4 games. Versus Buffalo, he had 83 receiving yards, and versus Green Bay, 4 weeks ago, he had 30 receiving yards. I do like his receptions in this one. He's had over 4 receptions in his last 4 games, but the line currently on BetMGM is that for him to have 5 receptions, and I didn't want to bet him to go under 5 receptions because I think that he has a pretty big mismatch for the Vikings defense, and it's just dependent on where Jared Goff is throwing the ball. But I also like him to have over 25 receiving yards just because of his involvement with the offense, and I do expect him to have at least 3 receptions, and he could honestly have 1 reception for over 25 yards in this game and catch this line. So at plus 115, I invested a little bit more than half a unit on this parlay for a potential return on investment of 115%. As always, have bankroll consciousness and understanding of your finances when deciding to place these bets if you do decide to place it with me. So these next 2 parlays, one's a straight bet at plus 145 for Jameson Williams to have over 75 receiving yards, and then the one at the bottom is lower odds at plus 125 for him to have 5 receptions and over 50 yards. And I think that if there's a lot of defensive coverage towards Amar St. Brown, it'll leave Jay Will open and probably on man-to-man coverage for him to catch the ball. And I think that he can create space, and he is a big play receiver, so I do like his chances for over 50 receiving yards in this game. And I think that if the targets are there, he has a good chance of getting over 75 receiving yards as well. In terms of his receptions at 5, he's had over 5 receptions in 4 out of his last 5 games. And the only game that he didn't have over 5 receptions was versus Buffalo, where he had 3 for 37. Buffalo did a pretty good job at limiting Jameson Williams, and Amon St. Brown had an amazing game, having nearly over 200 yards in that game. So a lot of Jared Goff's passes were going towards St. Brown rather than Jay Will. But he did bounce back versus Chicago with 5 for 143 yards and a long receptions of 82 yards, as well as a touchdown. And then versus San Francisco, he had 5 receptions for 77 yards, a long reception of 41 yards, and 1 touchdown as well. So I don't mind his chances for scoring a touchdown in this game as well, and I do believe I have a parlay for that coming up. But at plus 145 and plus 125, I invested about 40% of a unit on the plus 145 and then half a unit on the plus 125 for potential returns on investment of 145 and 125% return. As always, have bankroll management, understanding of your finances when deciding to place these bets if you do decide to place it with me. So this next parlay is focused on the Lions players and kind of going along the same lines of them limiting Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I do think that Jared Goff has a good chance of having over 250 passing yards, and I do like Jameson Williams' chances of over 5 receptions, especially if they're the defense is focused on St. Brown. And I do like Sam Laporta for over 25 receiving yards. Looking at Jared Goff, as I mentioned, he's been passing the ball a lot more lately, especially since David Montgomery has been injured. These are the pass attempts in his last 4 games. He had 34 versus San Francisco for 303 yards, 32 pass attempts for 336 yards. Versus Buffalo, he had 59 pass attempts for 494 yards. And then versus Green Bay, he had 41 pass attempts for 283 yards. And then versus Chicago, again at home on Thanksgiving, I believe, it was 34 pass attempts for 221 yards. So I do think he has a good chance of having over 250 yards. He's gone over this mark in his last 4 games, and the Vikings defense is a pretty good matchup for quarterbacks, especially this season. And I think with Jared Goff being at home, the Lions offense will probably be on point, and he should be able to go over 250 passing yards, especially if he's having over 30 pass attempts in this game. Now looking at Sam Laporta, I do think that he is somewhat undervalued in this game just based off of how he did in the last game versus Minnesota. In the last game versus Minnesota, he had one reception for 25 yards on only two targets. But I do think that his games lately have shown that he has been more involved with the offense uh, because they have been without David Montgomery. In his last four games, he's had over 43 yards in those games, and we only need him to have over 25 receiving yards in this one. And he's also had over four receptions in each of those games. So I do think that he has a good chance of over 25 receiving yards, especially if he has a larger target share than he did in his last game versus Minnesota. At plus 175, I put a little bit more than half a unit on this parlay for potential return on investment of 175%. As always, have bankroll management and understanding of your finances when deciding to place these bets. So his next parlay is focused on the Minnesota Vikings players and going under the notion that they're limiting Justin Jefferson from receiving the ball. So I like Sam Darnold for over 25 completions, TJ Hawkinson for over 25 receiving yards, and Jordan Addison for over 25 receiving yards. Uh, Focusing on Sam Darnold's completions, there's a lot of narrative in the media saying that Sam Darnold is just bound to regress, but he's played very well this season, and I do think that if he's able to make passes in the short and intermediate routes to Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, he should be able to have easy completions to these receivers and should be able to go over 24 and a half pass completions. Uh, in his last game versus Detroit, he had 22 completions on 27 attempts, so he was super efficient for 259 passing yards. But I lean towards his completions rather than his yards just because Justin Jefferson is such a big play receiver that if they are limiting Justin Jefferson to say under 50 receiving yards, the likelihood is that Sam Darnold is just passing to intermediate routes and short routes, which will be easier completions but lower yards. I also like TJ Hawkinson for over 25 receiving yards in this game. And I actually like this play probably up to like 50 receiving yards. So Hawkinson, he's really good against man coverage, and he's gone over 25 receiving yards in every game except for one game this season versus Tennessee, where he only had two receptions for 13 yards. And I just think that how he's been lately has shown that he has been more involved, especially when Justin Jefferson is limited to some extent. In his last three games, he's had 68 receiving yards on five receptions, 27 receiving yards on two receptions, and 52 receiving yards on five receptions. So I think that if the targets are there, he should be a pretty good tight end to get open against the man coverage that the Lions are likely to play. I also like Jordan Addison for over 25 receiving yards in this parlay. He's gone over 25 receiving yards in every single game this season except for one game versus the Rams where he only had 22 receiving yards. But in his last five games, he's gone over 35 receiving yards, and he's had at least four catches in each of those games. He's a great intermediate receiver and does decently well against man coverage as well. Even though Justin Jefferson is a better receiver overall, he can get open, and I do think that he has a good chance of over 25 receiving yards, especially if the Lions change their defensive scheme and start to double team or bring a safety down on Justin Jefferson. So at plus 120, I put half a unit on this parlay for a potential return on investment of 120%. As always, have bankroll consciousness and understanding of your finances when deciding to place these bets if you decide to place it with me. So this was the touchdown parlay that I mentioned earlier in this video. At plus 425, I have Justin Jefferson for over 75 receiving yards and a touchdown, as well as Jameson Williams to record 50 receiving yards and a touchdown. Focusing on Justin Jefferson, I think that it's kind of self-explanatory how good he is. And he's also scored 5 touchdowns in his last 4 games. And I just think that with this game being such an important game for both these teams, I think that Justin Jefferson will get a lot of targets, especially when it comes to the red zone. And I think with his sure hands, he should be able to score a touchdown, whether that's off of a big play or just like a slant deep inside the red zone. I also like his chances for over 75 receiving yards if he is getting targeted a lot. He's gone over 75 receiving yards in 4 out of the last 5 games, and in the only game that he didn't go over, he had 73 receiving yards versus Chicago. So I do think that with the targets and the attention that he's going to get from Sam Darnold in the red zone, he likely will be able to go over 75 receiving yards and a touchdown. I also like Jameson Williams to have over 50 receiving yards and a touchdown. He scored a touchdown in 3 straight games and has gone over 50 receiving yards in 2 out of those 3 games. And in the only game that he didn't was against Buffalo, like I mentioned, where he had 3 receptions for 37 yards, but was still able to score a receiving touchdown. I just think that with how good the Vikings are at limiting the run, Jared Goff will likely be attempting a lot of passes, and Amon-Ra St. Brown is also a good option to score a touchdown. But I think that Jameson Williams, with his big play potential, uh, can score a touchdown from multiple avenues, even on the rushing end as well, which will give him a good chance at an anytime touchdown. So at plus 425, I invested 1 unit on this parlay for a potential return on investment of 425%. As always, have bankroll consciousness to understand refinances when deciding to place these bets if you decide to place it with me. So that's the last parlay that I have in this video. It's a long shot parlay that I tend to like to have when watching football. So at plus 1100, I have both of the field goal kickers for the teams to make 2 field goals. Jahmyr Gibbs to go over 100 rushing and receiving yards, as well as to score a touchdown. The Vikings to keep this game close, not to lose by more than 13 points, but the Lions to ultimately win the game. And I think they win the game by their defense just playing better than they have lately. So holding the Vikings to under 32 points. I think with this parlay, it's mainly like a defensive parlay that I think could have very well happened with both these teams being division foes. I think that when both teams get into the red zone, they likely will be able to take the points in terms of kicking the field goals rather than going for it on fourth down until it comes to the fourth quarter. And I think both these teams know what's on the line and would rather play the game, or at least for the Vikings, play the game more conservatively than the Lions. I know that Dan Campbell kind of prides himself on being an aggressive head coach, and the aggressive culture that he created with the Lions allowed them to be the number 1 team in the NFC North this season, as well as really good last season. But I do think that both these field goal kickers are pretty good, and with this game being inside of a dome, there's no weather issues or anything, so I like the chances for both to have over 2 field goals made. And I spoke upon Jahmyr Gibbs. His rushing and receiving potential is very high in this game, and without David Montgomery, I think that he'll be highly involved. And he had a really good game versus the Vikings previously, so I do like his chances for over a touchdown as well. And if this game is more defensive, I do think that the Vikings can keep it within 13 points by leaning towards the Lions winning this game at home on primetime. And I think they'd probably do that by limiting the Vikings scoring when it comes to the third and fourth quarters. So at plus 1100, I invested 1 unit or half a unit on this parlay for a potential return on investment of 1,100%. As always, have bankroll consciousness to understand where your finances when deciding to place these bets if you do decide to place it with me. So I just want to remind you guys that I have 2 bonus promos in the description below for BetMGM as well as Bet365. BetMGM, you can get $100 in free bonus bets if you register using the info in the description, and then on Bet365 it's $50. So be sure to check out the description if you are in the states highlighted above. So those are parlays that I have for this Vikings Lion matchup. Be sure to like and comment on my video, as well as share and subscribe to my channel. And stay tuned for more NFL and NBA videos coming out later this week. But until next time, appreciate you guys for watching. Peace.